Firstly, thank you, Louis, for giving me opportunity to interview you for my YouTube channel and podcast.
Yeah, no sweat. Anytime.
So I've gone through your profile and I can see you're into cloud and I can see you're doing so much things and tech. So I thought to tell about you and your work to my audience.
Yeah, of course, definitely. Yeah, I'm very much embedded into the sort of the cloud scene, and particularly around sort of getting people into cloud careers and stuff like that, which has become, it started off as a hobby, I suppose, but then it's become a bit more than a hobby as well. So I'm more than happy to chat about that as well.
So before that, can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
Yeah, of course, sure. So I'm Lou. Professionally, I have worked as a software engineer for the last 10 years. 10 years or so, various different roles, different industries, and things like that. Right now, I work as a product manager for Gitpod. Gitpod is a company that does what is called cloud developer environments, which a simple way of thinking about it is that you do sort of coding yourself rather than on your local machine, you do it on a cloud or a remote machine. Which has a bunch of benefits and there's a bunch of perks from doing that, and that's kind of what I do as my day job. And then what I also run is this thing called Open Up the Cloud, and I do a lot of talking to folks about getting into the cloud industry. And that on my side is like blogging about that, but then recently also doing some YouTube stuff and then social media and events and things like that as well. And generally, I'm just quite passionate on that side about getting people into the cloud industry itself, which has been around for sort of 10, 15 years, but is still quite far behind in terms of providing people sort of the tools and things that they need to get into that industry. It's still not where it needs to be in terms of that maturity for folks, and that's kind of what I'm passionate about, is trying to basically break that barrier down and just make the path into the cloud industry that little bit easier for people.
Awesome. So what made you to start this Open Up the Cloud?
So it happened kind of organically, really. So I, maybe a couple of years ago, started writing just online and about tech in general and freelance writing. I was always kind of interested in writing, writing things that I was learning and stuff like that. That kind of led to working as a freelance writer. So I worked for some companies, wrote some tech content for some different people, and I think somewhere along the lines, from a work perspective, I kind of started going down this sort of cloud route as well. And I started getting more interested in writing about that. And as I started writing about it, I kind of organically found that there were so many questions to answer. There were so many things that people didn't know. So I wrote more about that on my website itself, and that just grew and grew and grew. And I think at some point I kind of woke up one day and felt the sort of responsibility of what I was actually doing, because when I started, no one read anything that I put out, right? So no one read the blogs that I wrote, and you can just write freely. But over time, I started to get messages from people, hey, you really helped me get into this industry, or, you really helped me with this. And I felt this sort of responsibility, I suppose, to make sure that I was doing a good job with this content, to make sure that the advice I was giving was correct. And at that point, I kind of made a decision to sort of double down on what I was doing and really go into it and put some real effort into it, because I could see the impact it was having for people, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing a good job really in providing good information, good data, and that kind of thing.
So you are into software engineering from last 10 years. So what is your motivation?
Well, I have many motivations, right, from different angles. From if we talk about the open up the cloud side, it's what I'm mentioning here. So it's seeing that impact that I'm having on people now, and I think at some point you kind of reach this this decision point with your career or with your life where potentially you start to feel like you've achieved enough for yourself personally, and you start to have this desire to really help others and to share and to give back once you're, I suppose, lucky enough that you maybe have a stable job and things like that. And that conversation for me was provoked from my old manager, who I basically put a tweet out at some point where I said that I was going to monetize the website. I wanted to earn money from Open Up the Cloud in general. And I had an idea behind this. I had an idea what I wanted to do with that money. But it wasn't I wasn't transparent about it. I didn't talk about it externally. And my boss came to me and said, hey, like, you work in tech, you already have a good salary. Why do you want to earn money from this? And basically, like, the thing that I had in the back of my mind is I wanted to reinvest that money back into the community, right? Because running this website, it's not a lot of money, but hosting costs money. If you have any small SaaS products, if you want to buy some software, this all costs money. So it was all costing me money, which I was okay with, but I wanted this to somehow be sustainable. So I wanted to find a way that Open Up the Cloud could earn money so that I could reinvest that back into what I was doing, and then hopefully just grow it out a little bit further, take it to the next level. So it's that underlying motivation from wanting to help people and see them grow, is really what's kind of driving my motivation there, because I wouldn't get up in the morning early and commit time to doing this before work and stuff like that if it weren't for the sort of the messages that people send me where they say, hey, thank you so much for helping me, or like yesterday, some guy saying, hey, the conversation we had 6 months ago made such a big impact on me today, and that kind of stuff. That's sort of infinite motivation from that kind of thing. I think that's what motivates me on that side.
The name itself, it's very easy, and it makes even a beginner to understand. Open up the cloud. So what made you to put this name
Yeah, it's a great question. So it originally wasn't called Open Up the Cloud in its first incarnation. So the website itself was called the Dev Coach, and that name came from an old company. So when I was working as a sort of a senior engineer, we used to have this idea of like dev coaches, and a dev coach was someone that was a coach for your software developers, and it was about your personal development. And I really liked that name, name, and I named my website after it because I was speaking to software developers, and I wanted to share sort of information that I had with them and take it forward like that. But what I kind of found over time is that name didn't really suit me and didn't really suit the mission behind what I was doing, because it was, it kind of felt like it was about me, because it was like the dev coach. So it's all about me. I'm going to coach you. I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm really smart, and I'm going to impart my wisdom on you, which over time really wasn't what I was about. So I started to meditate on that a bit more, and it was more about helping the community. It was more about opening up the industry. And I think it just came from there, like wanting to have this sort of metaphorical name about opening up the industry as well. And obviously, I guess the cloud industry, it makes sense because it's it's kind of like opening up the sky, and it has these this nice image for it as well. So yeah, it was really when I had to make a transition earlier on this year away from that old branding and kind of really double down on this cloud thing as well. And what gave me the confidence to do that as well is because the market behind like the cloud industry right now is really coming to life. It's really taking life, and I could see that from people coming to my articles, that people started to align with this word cloud, whereas before they didn't. Before it was this thing that companies did, like this cloud thing, but now people are saying, hey, I want a career in the cloud industry. Whereas before, maybe they were saying, I want a career in tech, and that would mean being in the cloud industry. But now people directly are saying, hey, I want to get into cloud as a specific thing. So that's kind of why then I shifted the name towards that, because because the market and because people were looking for cloud stuff, that it made sense.
So how many services you have explained in it?
In terms of cloud services?
Yeah, the cloud services.
Tough question to answer, really. So I suppose for people that aren't familiar with the cloud, if you take the industry as a whole, so you've got, mostly speaking, 3 big providers. So there's Amazon, there's Azure, and there's GCP, so Google. So you've got Microsoft, Amazon, and then Google. Within each of those, I suppose there is a huge amount of services. I think in AWS alone, there's maybe about 250, 300 services within AWS. So oftentimes I don't come from a service standpoint necessarily. So one sort of series of videos that I did on YouTube was related to this thing called the Cloud Resume Challenge, and that was all about helping people to build a resume using cloud services. And within that, there's a number of recommended services that people use, which was basically DynamoDB. AWS S3, CloudFront, Route 53, and I think that's mostly it. You could use some other stuff as well, but the idea behind that really was to build on top of some of these core AWS services. It's now, the challenge is now extended to Azure and GCP as well. But them sort of 4 or 5 services was what that challenge was about. So a lot of my content usually is a little bit more outcome focused, like how to build X using these cloud services rather than about the cloud services themselves, if that makes sense. But if I was to guess, I don't know. I've maybe talked about 50 different cloud services on there or something like this. I don't know. Maybe 50 or so.
Can I say your previous experience as a software engineer for a long time, for 10 years, helped you in writing technical stuff and make people to connect with the cloud content?
Yeah, for sure, definitely. It's one thing that I think about quite a lot. There are some other people in this space, in the content space, in the tech space. I think, there's sometimes a lot of people that get into the early market, so helping people as developers in their early stages. And I think there's a lot of content out there for these people, but sometimes the people that are creating that content aren't necessarily people that are fully in the industry, let's say, or have that like extensive experience. So there are some creators that I also hang out with, and I like their content as well because they've been in the industry, let's say, similar time, similar level of experience, which comes with it, I suppose, a level of understanding about the industry as a whole. So when you haven't worked for many companies, you kind of don't know how things work right across those different companies. You can't sort of spot trends and things like that. Whereas when you've had that, I guess, the depth of experience, you can bring that into it, right? So you can say, hey, when I used to work for this company, we did things this way. When I worked for this company, we did things that way. And I think that really helps as well, giving just generally credibility, I suppose, to the things that you're writing about or the things that I'm doing. I can kind of rely on some of those past experiences, which from my side at this point are quite varied, different industries from finance to e-com to, startups and bigger companies as well. So you can kind of take that context. I suppose the only thing that I don't have in my past history is like with the big sort of hyper-tech companies, like the FANG companies, the Facebook, Amazon, and things like that. Maybe in future I'll want to work for one of those guys, but for the time being, I haven't necessarily worked for one of those. The biggest company I worked for before is DAZN, my last employer, also a big company, sort of millions of customers, global company, big complicated sort of engineering and tech department. So I guess quite similar to maybe like a Netflix type company, but not Netflix, let's say.
So implementing the services, trying to do something with the cloud services practically is completely different from reading it from a blog. So how good you are in explaining the concept for the people who are coming to your website?
As in, how good am I?
Yeah.
Well, I hope pretty good. Yeah, the thing that I try to do is with the content is try to provide content that is answering questions that people have. So my background in writing, one of the ways that I drove traffic to the website itself is through content marketing and SEO and things like that. And what you learn from doing things from sort of this content standpoint, SEO standpoint, is that you will get traffic if you answer questions that people have. And obviously it's a big topic of understanding an industry and understanding the questions that people might have. But what I find over time is the questions that you might want to answer in a blog or in an article is not necessarily the questions that people would ask themselves. So some of the biggest performing articles on my website, for instance, are things like, do I need to code if I'm getting into the cloud industry? Now, I think anyone in the cloud industry wouldn't even think to ask that question because they have an answer already in their mind and they think it's maybe really obvious the answer to this question, should you code or not? But those are the types of questions that someone getting into the industry wants to know. And there's other questions as well, like, what certification should I take? Which certification is best? And it's really getting into the mindset of that beginner to really answer those questions in their frame of reference, because the person coming into the cloud industry, it's like, I don't know, it's a single mother that doesn't have a lot of time, that needs to know, what can I do to spend this time effectively so that I can get this job, so that I can progress. And I think it's a lot about understanding that, the people behind the content, who is reading your content, what situation are they in their life, and how are they approaching your content, what questions do they have, and really trying to speak to them in the way that they would ask it. Where I think a lot of content creators sort of make a mistake on that side is they make content that they want to make rather than making content that other people need, if that makes sense. So from that side, the proof is in the metrics, I guess, in the amount of people that read the website and come onto YouTube and stuff like that. The website itself has a lot more traffic than YouTube. I got into the YouTube stuff this year, maybe at the start of this year, and I'm still learning that. Creating content in video format is very different to written format. There are different rules. There are different, I guess, different things that you need to do when you're doing things in a video world rather than in a written content blog world.
So it's very tough for you to do your full-time job and become a content creator and write content for your viewers, people who have to your visitors and who are asking you questions. And you're not only
Yep.
putting in your website, you're doing YouTube videos
Yep.
also. How you're managing time?
Yes, it's a great question, because I know a lot of other people might potentially want to do that. The thing that I kind of apply to my process is trying to just treat the work that I do for Open Up the Cloud like as a professional, as I would if someone was paying me for it, which it's easy to not do that, I think, when you're working for yourself and no one is there asking you to do this, no one is forcing you up in the morning to come to work. It's sometimes easy to, I'll go on Facebook, I'll go on Twitter, I'll waste some time. So I think that applying that mindset is what I try to do. Try and treat this, this is a job, this is a thing that I turn up and do. Now, of course, I enjoy it, but at the same time, you have to acknowledge that, doing a job, sometimes you do things you don't enjoy, right? Like you might have to do some tasks that are kind of boring, but they just need to be done. So that's kind of the frame of reference that I come into it. From a more practical standpoint, though, what I do is I actually do all of this work before work. So I get up at basically 6 in the morning. I start work at like 9. Every morning, 6 till 9, 3 hours. That's more than enough time to kind of get some real progress with these different aspects. And then what I do now is really just balance between sometimes written content, sometimes video. The thing about written content and video, like written content is slightly easier because it's not time bound. If you write an article for SEO, people don't go to your website every day anymore. They did 20 years ago. They went to blogs every day. They don't do that anymore, I don't think. They go to YouTube every day. So if you put stuff out on YouTube, it is important, I think, to keep that cadence, to keep putting content out frequently. So I do sort of try to make sure that I'm putting out around about a video a week. Sometimes that's challenging because the video might be quite complicated and I want to make sure that the video is higher quality. But really, ideally, I'm trying to get out at least a video a week right now. And then in the time in between that, then put out written content as well and, keep traffic coming to the website. But I do that mostly just dedicating a block of time in the morning, 3 hours before I start work. And then throughout the day, if I go for a walk, if I go to the gym, listen to a podcast or something like that, watch a video, and that helps you to kind of digest some more information, give you some ideas so that next morning, maybe you have a few more ideas, right? Like, cool, I've got the next video to do. I've got some ideas from this podcast I listened to, and you can start to put those ideas in there as well. And then it becomes like a way of life. You just try and, read articles, watch videos, and just, load all that stuff into your brain so that when it comes to creating content, it becomes easier, right? Because you've got all of these ideas, all of these thoughts that, from other people that has given you, and then you can kind of put that into your own content as well.
So you worked already in one of the top companies in the world. So And you also saw how to do it, how the things work in real time. So what you learned personally?
What did I learn personally? That is a great question. So yeah, this is a topic I suppose I want to cover a bit more in my own content, to be honest, is to get under the skin of some topics that some people feel a bit uncomfortable talking about. So, an obvious topic that people feel uncomfortable talking about is things like salary negotiation and money. Now, I don't know how it is for you, but certainly in the UK and in England, etc., that talking about money, generally speaking, is not people don't do it very much. They don't talk about it very much, but it's one of those things that if you talk to other people about money, if you talk to other people about these topics that are maybe slightly taboo, I think it can be really helpful for some people. And there are other topics that relate, I think, to your career that some people don't like to talk about, they don't like to bring forward. So from the outside looking in, you think sometimes that you hope that the world is fair, you hope that getting into some of these companies is a fair process, and there's a lot going on in the world to try and make these processes fairer for sure. But I think sometimes people naively assume a bit too much that if you work hard, that someone's going to notice you and you're going to get that job that you want. And for sure, working hard is an important ingredient, but like understanding how these companies work and how people think within these companies is important. So when you're on the outside getting in, I think that's important to consider. So when you're interviewing and things like that, is to understand really how these companies work when it's the interview process. So what I mean by that, one thing that I see people making a mistake of during the interview process is not considering what the world looks like for the people on the other side of the equation. So let's pretend that I'm an interviewer, right? So I'm interviewing you for a tech company. A lot of people, when they apply, don't think about the dynamics that I, as an interviewer, have right now. So within a tech company, if we're hiring, I'm probably a software engineer. I'm probably really busy. I probably don't have a lot of time to commit to things like reviewing resumes, to reviewing, submissions from people. So you have to keep that in mind, I suppose, when you're going through those application processes, is, make sure that you're tailoring your job, your resume to the job description. Make sure you're making it really, really easy for those people to hire you, because I feel like sometimes people are relying too much on the world being, really fair and saying, well, I'm a good person, I'm a hard worker, I know what I'm talking about. Surely these people will see that. And I think that is probably the wrong way of looking at it. You have to look at it and say, hey, they have very little time. They don't know who I am. They don't necessarily trust me because they don't know who I am. So you need to make life easier for them. You need to show them, and some of the ways that I talk about as well is like things like projects and practical things. Making projects and hosting stuff on GitHub and making your work public really goes such a massive way towards showing an employer that you can do the work that you say you can do. So those are just like these little, I guess, like tips and sort of hacks that people don't consider when they're applying for these companies or just trying to get into the tech space. And this idea also applies internally, right? Because you can look from the outside in. Some people are trying to get into the big tech company, but then some people are already in the big tech company and they're trying to get promoted. And it's the same mindset. The world isn't strictly fair and you shouldn't treat it as such. Like if you think, if I just do my job well, I will get noticed and I will get promoted. And the reality is that whilst, again, I really wish that were the case, you have to look at the other things that are going on. Again, think about your boss. What does your boss need to get done? What key metrics is your boss reporting on? And start to think about how you can help them. How can I help my boss do a better job themselves? And in turn, that's going to help me potentially get promoted and things like that. And that's probably one thing that I would say that I've learned over that time is to, maybe just embrace the way that the world works and how these companies work. Don't just go into this sort of naively thinking that, hard work and, you're a good person and you work hard, so that's gonna mean success and that's gonna mean getting hired. Like, start to think about how you can learn more about how these companies work. If that's your goal, if your goal is to get into those companies and to be successful, really start to get behind the skin of how these companies work. And you can do that by, watching videos on YouTube and listening to these types of interviews and stuff like that. But, people don't realize that you can reach out to people. I think people don't send a message. Like, if you send a message on LinkedIn or on Twitter, if you do that well, people will answer you. So if you want to go for work for these big companies like Netflix and whatnot, I don't think it's unreasonable for you to just go and directly, send a message to some engineer or someone in Netflix, say, hey, Netflix looks really cool. I want to apply for Netflix. I'm thinking about working there. Can you give me some insight into the interview process? What should I do? What should I focus on? And that can unlock so many doors. So rather than just throwing that resume through, into the black hole, submitting it online, just go and ask people. Try to figure out how that process works, and that's going to unlock those doors for people a lot more than thinking that they you go through the front door, and that if you work hard and then people will see that. You have to start to get behind the scenes and start to understand how these companies work. So yeah. So it's a long answer, but I hope it's useful to some people, because I see so many people trip up on this. So hopefully that kind of spurs something for someone to kind of maybe change their strategy or approach to how they're thinking about the hiring process or their career and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So you're writing content on your website about cloud services and mainly about how to build an app or a website using
Yep.
the cloud services. So which category people are connecting with your writing? Beginner level or intermediate or expert?
Yeah, so in terms of my content, I kind of I do focus, I suppose, a little bit more on the beginner side. However, generally speaking, I think the audience for my type of content is just this type of person that is career driven, someone that's in the cloud industry and is also career driven, wants to actively improve their career, wants to progress, wants to, build their skills and things like that, because that's what I'm talking about. So if I go out there and I do a video talking about like the basics of Docker, let's say, like it's a container technology, that is relevant, I suppose, if you're trying to get into the industry, but it's also relevant if you're in the industry as well. So, if you're a back-end developer that hasn't touched that technology, learning that's going to make sense for you. You're going to want to learn about this type of technology. Or if you're an architect, maybe you might also want to understand a bit more about how Docker works. If you're like me, a product manager, I need to know how that works. So really, I target this stuff usually at beginners, people getting into the industry, but it also totally applies for people that are trying to just learn skills to progress their career, because at the end of the day with tech, like, we have to keep up. There's new stuff coming out all the time, and you have to sort of reinvent yourself every couple of years, look at the trends, look at your own skills and say, hey, this is my sort of specialty going forward. Like, I want to be, okay, maybe for the next couple of years, like I'm an Android developer or whatever it is for you. For me, that's obviously right now it's cloud. Like for me, it's like I'm super interested in cloud specifically, but different people, it's different specialties. So yeah, I think that some of the content's going to resonate for those other people as well, not just the people that are trying to get into the cloud industry. But yeah, I do put a lot of content out for those folks, because I feel like there is not a lot out there for them, for getting into the industry. And sometimes it feels a bit like there's a massive barrier. It feels like there are people in the industry and there are people not in the industry, and there's not a lot of bridges between. There's not a lot of people willing to, to put out this content that says, hey, this is how you break into these companies. This is how these companies work. I did a resume review. The last video that's on my channel is a resume review. And I take this guy's resume. This guy basically allowed me to review it. Very kind of him to let me go through that on the video. And I go through it and I talk about, hey, I would change this for these reasons. I would change that for these reasons. I would change, these are the things that I would do. because I'm trying to give people that insight so that when they're putting together their resume, for instance, that they know what someone on the hiring side, which is sometimes that's me. So sometimes you're giving your resume to me if I'm hiring or on the hiring side of the company. And that's the lens that I'm going to view your resume. I'm going to look for those things that I pointed out in that video. And that's what's going to go through my head. So I just really want to make that information available to people so that they know how those kind of processes go. And yeah, it comes back to the name conversation about this being about opening up the industry and just making things more transparent. So yeah, that's mainly my focus really, is just try to break those barriers to have some of those conversations, maybe some of those awkward and difficult conversations that people don't have, because as well that is one of my motivations also, is if I'm in a work context and I have like a one-to-one or a coaching conversation, these are the types of topics that I'll talk about with someone. They say, hey, I want to progress my career, and we'll talk about the same things that I will talk about on YouTube or in the blog. And all I'm really doing there is just trying to take that conversation that I might have with someone in real life, a person one-on-one or a coaching conversation, and just make that information freely available. Make it public, make it a blog, make it an article, so people can go and kind of get that insight into how these processes work for these tech companies.
So, can I call you as a technologist with complete potential, because you're doing too many important things, because you're working one side as a software engineer, as a product developer, you're creating and you're making things possible, and another side you're communicating with your audience, with your visitors, trying to explain what they want and what they need, and also you're understanding the both sides, what happens in the industry, at the same time the people who are not into the industry.
Yeah, for sure. But there's actually a massive overlap between the things that I do now on the Open Up the Cloud side and the stuff that I do on a work side, right? So I work now as a product manager, and for all intents and purposes, what a product manager does is they are guiding the business on decisions that we make about our product. And our product is a tool for developers, right? So Gitpod is a tool that software engineers use. So as a product manager, I need to understand software engineers very well. I need to understand what do software engineers want from Gitpod as a product. And a lot of the tools that I use in Open Up the Cloud, in understanding content and what questions people have, that's very much the same skill set that I use at work as well, right? So as a product manager, I do a lot of things like usability testing, which is basically you take a tech product or a product in general, you put it in front of users and you watch them use it. You kind of record what they say and how they interact with that product. And then based on that, you can then make adjustments to the product. But all of these processes really are just about getting an engineering team closer to customers so that they can see how customers interact with their product, and we can bring that feedback into the product itself, and we can build better features, we can build a better product. And I think this skill set on the product side is basically the same skill set on a content side, because content is all about empathy, right? Like it's about the audience. What does the audience need? What's interesting for the audience? And then on a product side, it's the same thing. Like, what does my customer need? What's valuable to a customer? What are they going to pay for? And interestingly enough, it's a very similar person. So the customer for Gitpod is developers, and then the sort of persona for my Open Up the Cloud stuff is also new developers or career developers. So it's the same person. I need to understand software engineers in general for both work life and sort of content. So there are parallels, I guess. There's skill sets that I use in my day-to-day and also in the stuff that I do separately for Open Up the Cloud as well, so which is useful. And things that I learn from Open Up the Cloud I bring into work and vice versa. So it works really well. It's quite complementary, which is quite nice.
So what are the projects that you did?
Do you mean from like work side or on?
Yeah, from work side.
I've done lots of projects. Yeah, for sure. So I've done a lot of different projects over time, some working for, let's say, for like government companies, some that come to mind and stand out for me. So one that really stands out is I work with this financial services startup. So a couple of years ago, we had this change in the UK and in a bunch of other companies called open banking. So open banking was this mandate, or it was actually called PSD2 in the UK, but it was this mandate that banks needed to provide APIs to their data, so that you could have third parties come in and build applications and software about financial products. Now, previously this was not possible, so banks didn't provide APIs unless they wanted to. So some small banks, we have a bank called Monzo here in the UK. There's, I think, a bunch of other, they call them challenger banks, like these small tech-focused banks, and they would provide APIs. And from that, you could have a whole ecosystem of products built on top of those. So for Monzo, they could, you could download an app on the App Store that was about budgeting or that was about, I don't know, investing, and it would pull data out of your Monzo account, and then you could have a whole app, a whole different experience. And Monzo facilitated that through APIs. So I worked for this company that was basically trying to provide a financial product in that space. And I worked with them, with their team, to basically build the first iteration of their product. And eventually they went on and got investment and things like that. So that one stands out to me a lot in the past, because that was really taking from nothing up to building that whole product. And then they went on. I've been meaning to catch up with them ever since, because I want to hear about where the business is now. But that took them from zero. They had nothing. There was not a line of code existed up until they got millions of I guess pounds in investment from investors to invest in this business idea. And that was a very proud moment from my side, learning what that whole process was like and just figuring out everything that we needed to build in order to build that initial version of their application. So that one sticks out. And I suppose another one that sticks out is coming out of DAZN. So within DAZN, I was part of what they call their internal developer experience team. So developer experience, for people that aren't necessarily aware, is it's this focus on the developer as an end user. So like applying ideas from user experience to development. So speeding up people's workflows, making their life quicker, and that comes in many forms: templates, platforms. You can build websites, tooling, library, etc. And all of that's part of this developer experience. And for some companies, when they get big enough, it becomes justifiable to have one person, or maybe even many people, or in some cases teams of different people that focus on building out internal tooling for these companies. So like we talked about Netflix and Google, and all of those companies will have these internal facing teams. And so then when I worked for DAZN, I was with the team. Before I joined, there was no developer experience team, and then when I left, there was about 12 of us working internally. And this whole space of developer experience is still new. Like there's not a lot of content. If you go online and search about like how should you set up a developer experience team and things like that, you won't get too many answers, because not a lot of people are talking about this. And we've just started recently a community for that as well. We've got a talk tomorrow, basically on Twitter Spaces, talking about developer experience as a whole, and starting to share some of that information about how people can start developer experience teams, measure them. There's a lot of different questions that people have about this whole sort of developer experience space as well. So that was another project as well, that kind of like a big one for me, that sort of proud of, was building that team and everything that we built internally for them, which was like a whole suite of internal tools and projects that we built as part of that developer experience team.
So what are the common questions that your visitors ask you regarding cloud?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we mentioned one before, I suppose, which was, should I learn to code? I mean, I can spoil that question for you right now, and I can say that for cloud people, I think the answer is probably. Not every job in cloud requires you to code. but it's going to help. If you can learn to code, if you can challenge yourself like that, it helps. It really can help learning to code. So that's one big question that people have. Another question people often have is about the different roles. So like cloud, okay, cool. But what are the different jobs within cloud? Like, should I try to become an architect, an engineer, a designer, and that kind of thing? So there's a lot of different roles out there for people within the cloud industry as a whole. So it's kind of hard for me to make a recommendation. What I often suggest that people do is basically try to find a role that you think roughly matches you, and then go and read a whole bunch of job descriptions about that. Now, some people, I tell them this and I can tell that they don't want to do it, right? Because looking at job descriptions is super boring. But it's not, because if you go and look at those job descriptions, you'll get a better understanding of what that role is and what it does. So I did, again, a video on my channel where I went through, I sat there and I went through 100 different cloud engineering role definitions and pulled out, here are the top skills, here are the top things that cloud engineers are being asked to do. And as a result of sitting there, maybe it took me 6 hours to do that or something, to go through these 100 different job descriptions. But at the end, I had such a better understanding of what that job actually was. So that's another one as well, is understanding those different roles that people have in the cloud. And then, what I will say to those people is, there's different roles. So you got like architect. This is like the big picture type of person. They're planning out how these software components fit together and choosing which solutions to potentially build from. There's like that side of it. There's a software engineering side of it, which I think is maybe a bit more obvious. But then you've got subsections, right? You've got like data engineering. People forget things like this. So companies have a ton of data, data that's from their applications, their websites, and they need to get this data into formats that make sense. They need to be able to query it. They need to make that data accessible. They need to share that across their company, because within companies, it's really useful and it's really important to know data about what you're doing. In my space as a product person, I need to know how many people are using our product, which features are they using, and all of that comes from data, and all of that needs to be analyzed. So, data engineering and data architecture and stuff like that is also this big space that people, forget. So data is another one. UI, UX design, visual design, the front end development is also another big space. So if you're that visual type of person, maybe data's not your thing, maybe visual stuff is your thing, so UI, UX, that kind of thing, or product roles, more people-centered roles as well that exist. So that's another common question I get as well, is like, what roles are they? Because I guess people are trying to figure out, how do I get into this industry, and which role should I be kind of going for? So that's also a common question as well. But yeah, there's a lot of different questions that people tend to ask me. They ask me, which is the best cloud provider? AWS, Azure, GCP, yeah, which programming language should I learn? All of these different questions is kind of stuff that I'm doing my best to try and answer.
So even I want to come into cloud industry, and I want to work in cloud. I took training in a company recently, and they taught me the fundamental services, EC2 databases, like overview of the cloud, and some of the cloud services they made us to implement it by ourselves. And I have that basic understanding, but I didn't work in any company. I don't know how the things works in a company. Like a lot of people will be having a lot of doubts. Like you said, you spend time in understanding the job description, which is quite boring, but still it actually helps in understanding what exactly that company needs and that role uh, required. So not beginners like me or people can understand that. And different companies they write the job description in different way, and once we see that kind of a description, we feel scared, we feel intimidated, and we feel that we are not suitable for that particular position. So how do you explain this?
Yeah, that's a big part of it, really, is that when you come into any industry, even the cloud, you're going to have an element of uncertainty. You don't know how things work. You don't know how things work on the inside, so you're going to have to do a bit of figuring it out. The common mistakes that I see people making is what we talked about before. So one thing that I often recommend to people quite a lot is build actual real world projects. Like actually, you mentioned sort of some of these services like EC2 or databases. It's like take that and build something real. And obviously now the next question is, well, what does real look like? What do I actually, prioritize? Which aspects of this? What do I build? Do I build a website? Do I build an API? You could build so many things. So the thing is, you've just got to pick something that you're going to build and try to start to add more and more complexity to that. And I think going through that whole process really starts to help things click in your mind. It starts to help you see, oh, okay, so if I talked about the cloud resume before, you're building a website, but you're plugging in a backend, you're plugging in a database, you're plugging in what is a AWS Lambda, which is a serverless function. So you're learning about that along the way. And I think that the fact that you're touching it and you're actually experimenting with it really helps to bring it to life, because you and I can talk about this all day, but until you actually go and experiment with this stuff, I don't think it's really gonna sink in. Like, we can talk about databases forever to someone that's never touched a database, but it's only when they touch a database and kind of actually see the limitations and how they work that it's really going to come to life in their mind. And that's one thing that I think people really underestimate, because when it comes as well to the job hunt processes, companies really value that. If you've done something like that, you host it on GitHub, you build a real project, that can just, that really helps, because the employer can see that. And one thing that people trip up there is they stop too early. They build out a small project and they stop far too early. Because if you think about it, if you're a company like Netflix, you don't just do good enough. You don't build an API and you're, okay, cool, good enough. You don't. There's so many additional things that you need to add to those projects. People forget about like the operational side of things. When this runs in production, what happens if this is down? Like, what happens if this is inaccessible? We've all been on Facebook, or recently Facebook like went down everywhere, right? Like, it was, the whole world was banned from Facebook. Now, internally in Facebook, like a whole bunch of alerting will have gone off. Like, a whole bunch of people will have been called on their phone saying like, oh my God, Facebook is down, we need to fix this. And all that process is automated, and you can automate that kind of stuff in the cloud as well. And you can have emails and messages sent out. And that's the kind of stuff that people miss. They don't integrate because they don't know that that's a thing that people do. So one thing that I'm always trying to sort of emphasize is build projects. When they get to a certain level of complexity, just try and push that project that little bit more. And that's where reaching out to people on social media might help. Send a message to someone and say, hey, you're a software engineer, I built this project, what ways do you think that this could be improved? Like, what is missing? And they'll tell you, add some automation testing to it, add some monitoring to it, add some alerting to it, the documentation's not good enough, or something like that. So I think that can really help. But I suppose, yeah, there's the other side of it as well, which is the job side, right? Because that helps you understand the tech, but then you need to understand, how do I take what I built and take that to a job interview? How do I make convince an employer to actually hire me? And I suppose that's the whole different part of the equation, really. But I think trying to get hands-on, build a real project really helps. If you build something that you're passionate about or interested in, that's even better. You got an idea for an app that's going to help people, go build that kind of thing.
A person with tech experience, tech background, and a person without tech background, both are coming to an interview. So which one is going to be in?
It really depends on what they're looking for. I think people often really underestimate the value of experience. So there are a lot of people that are changing industries that are maybe a little bit older. Let's say, they're in their 50s, 60s, they've had kids, they've worked in a different industry, and maybe they're going into tech for whatever reason. Now, I often see these people really underestimate the value of their skills that they've gained in a different industry. Now, if you're 18, you've never worked a job in your entire life, okay, that's a different question, because you need to prove so many things, not just that you know the tech, but that you can communicate, you can work in a team. And that's a big unknown for someone that has no experience whatsoever. But I think people often underestimate the value of those existing skills. So the resume that I reviewed before for this guy on YouTube was, he worked in, I think, like in a bike shop doing like bike repairs and stuff like that. But the reality is there are leadership things that he did. There are self-management things that he did. And people really underestimate how important those things are. Right now we're hiring for someone on my team, and just a big factor of whether or not we hire that person is about their communication skills. Like, is this person able to take a task and figure out how to do it independently, or are they going to be a big burden on us as a team? Are we going to have to explain everything? So that's one thing I think people just really underestimate, to be honest, is if you are a good team player, and if you are good at communicating, if you're good at working in a team. Sorry, I just got a phone call that I need to cancel. But if you're good at working in a team and things like that, then that really applies. So to answer your question, is it going to be the tech person? Is it going to be the non-tech person? In my opinion, it's the person that can show that they have what it takes to do that role, which obviously is not just tech. So it's that communication, it's that teamwork, etc. If I get someone come through the door that has a ton of experience leading and managing teams, and maybe 1 year building code or writing code, or maybe they haven't even worked for a company, to be honest, maybe I would hire that person versus someone that might have had 5 years experience in tech, but their communication is terrible. If they can't communicate, if they can't listen, if they can't work as a team, then yeah, I might even go with the person with the non-tech experience, but less tech background. And that's the case in a few cases. Like, the challenge that you've got there, though, is recruitment processes are a funnel, right? There are different stages that you go through. So one of the challenges that you might face is companies sometimes use very simplistic criteria to sift resumes. So if they receive 100 resumes, they need to make a decision. How do I get rid of 85 of these resumes so I only have 15 to interview? I can't interview 100 people. So the way that they obviously do that is they have certain criteria. And unfortunately, some of those criteria they might say, we need someone with 3 years in tech for this role. So they might cut all of those people out from the hiring process. Now, the way that you get around that is, there's a couple of ways. One is you go and you work freelance. Now, I say freelance because you don't even have to do proper freelance. What you need to do is go out and build a project for someone. That could be your mom, it could be your neighbor, it doesn't matter. If there's a client, then you can do freelance and you can gain experience, which means that you can tick that box potentially and say, hey, look, I have 3 years of experience. Maybe it's not 3 years at Netflix, but it's 3 years, maybe building client stuff, which is freelance. Maybe, if you're picking up some jobs here and there, that kind of stuff can help tick those boxes that people don't think about, is do the freelance route. And then another way as well is, just focus on different companies, focus on smaller companies, things like that. They don't have such a strict process. They don't have time. They don't get as many applications. They might not get 100, they might just get 10. So they're going to interview all 10 people. So if you're maybe not getting through that front door and not getting an interview, think about those two things. Like, can I sort of engineer some experience by doing freelance stuff? And can I potentially target slightly different companies? Can I come at this from a slightly different angle, so that I'm not just being a victim of that CV process or the resume process where they're just, deciding, no, if you don't have 3 years of experience, you're not a candidate, we won't take you forward. So that, I suppose that's just a couple of ways that people can use to break that barrier.
So I have a couple of questions at last. You are into cloud from long time, and you understand the in-depth knowledge of it, and the global infrastructure and how the things are working around the world in cloud. Recently in my city also, my city is in South India, Hyderabad. In the city, AWS decided to put data center. So recently that came in an news article. So uh, uh, this is what happening. You know how things are working that the globally. So as a cloud person, how the future is going to be, how the cloud is going to create impact on IT industry.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's a little bit hard, I suppose, in some ways to predict the future completely, but there are some directions that we're going in. One thing is for sure that like this market is growing massively. So, if people are watching this and thinking they're on the fence about getting into this industry, like the industry is exploding right now and it's not showing any signs of slowing down. For instance, I know AWS put out a sort of initiative that they wanted to try and train. I think it was nearly 30 million people over the course of 5 years, because they recognize that, quite frankly, this industry is huge and we need some additional help to bring more people into the industry and train them, because we simply don't have enough people in the world that have these skills to take these jobs. There are so many companies out there that need cloud skills to do certain jobs within these companies, and there are just simply not enough people that fit the bill that are able to do them. So the industry is growing massively in that side. In terms of where the industry goes, one big aspect of the industry as well is this whole serverless thing. So when the cloud came about, or when it sort of first came into existence, what the cloud did is it took things that were in a data center, so taking a server, and it just made it available to you sort of on demand. So literally taking that physical machine, shoving it in a warehouse, and then saying to you, hey, if you pay me $10 a month, you can basically have this machine and I'll connect it to the internet and it's yours. And if you don't want it, just let me know and you don't have to pay me $10 anymore and the machine is no longer yours. So that really is all the cloud was back then. But the things have changed now. Things have gone up a level. So we have this whole idea of serverless, which has opened a whole new door, a whole new sort of sub-industry within the cloud industry that's now just opening up. And the way that works is, so the serverless idea came from, what if we go to the highest level of abstraction with a cloud service where you don't have to worry about anything else underneath? So with like a traditional server, let's say, you'd have to worry about, okay, so if I run a website, how many servers do I need? It's Black Friday, or there's some big day for e-commerce when people are buying stuff. Now maybe I need 10 servers rather than one server to handle that level of traffic. But that's a pain in the ass, because then you have to know, I need 10 servers for this period of time. And that scale becomes really difficult for really big companies. If you're Amazon.com, maybe on Black Friday, you might need 1 million servers. But then on a normal day, you only need like 10,000. And this is a real pain to deal with. So what serverless really does is take away a lot of those concerns. So you can, have what is essentially like elastic computation. So you can have a website, let's say, running on a serverless service, and you don't need to worry about scaling it. So more people go to your website, you have more server. Less people go to your website, you have less server, you pay less money. So it's entirely elastic. But because that serverless stuff is such a high level of abstraction, because you don't know about this server anymore, that we've unlocked all of these different workflows that you can build. So if we talk about AWS, for instance, there are some different serverless services that are really interesting. We have this service called Step Functions, which is like an orchestrator for serverless functions, and that allows you to build workflows. So if you have a checkout, let's say someone comes to you, they buy a product, that might trigger a function. They add to cart. Then when they buy, that might trigger the payment function. And you can build all of these as like small little modules. And there are these things that the cloud now provides us that basically allowed us to build very advanced computational stuff within the cloud. And that's now this whole industry. Now the cloud industry needs people who know serverless stuff. If that's on the Amazon ecosystem, if that's in AWS. Now, there are a whole bunch of companies out there that need people that know how to build serverless stuff. And it's just completely different to the other stuff. So, if I'm a person that worked in a data warehouse, provisioning servers, plugging in cables, managing physical hardware. The serverless stuff now in cloud is completely different. You could not take that person and put them into the serverless world without quite a lot of training. Like, they would need to learn about so much to transition. But that's a huge opportunity for a lot of people, because this person who's worked in a data center, they might have 20 years of experience. But because this new serverless thing is so new, if you go and take a course and you learn that for 6 months, you know more than this guy. So you've got just as much of a shot of landing that job in the cloud industry now as this guy with 20 years of experience in IT, because the things that we're doing in cloud now are just so different. So that's one big area, I guess, is the serverless space. It's a little bit hard to kind of wrap your head around until you kind of get into it and start to learn about those different serverless services and how they work. But that's going to be such a big part of this industry going forward, and that's going to keep evolving. Things are going to get more and more down this serverless path where you have no idea about the underlying infrastructure. You don't know about the server that's underneath your code. Your code just runs, it scales. You have a database. You don't have to worry about how many nodes, how many clusters. It just works. So we will keep going down that trend as well.
So one last question. What do you say? Your words to the beginners and intermediate level and the experts who are into cloud. As a person who is into software engineering for 10 years, and as a person who is working on product development, and as a person who is writing about the technical content about cloud. So what are your final words to all these category people?
Yeah, for sure. That's also a great question. I would say for a lot of these people, if you're thinking of doing it, then you can do that. I'm a firm believer that code and tech itself is not something that like special people can do. It's not like you need to learn deep maths and things like that. Like, this is entirely like something that every person, I think, can learn. If you can learn, maths in school, if you can learn about sciences, you can learn about this tech stuff. It's not something that's, it seems really scary at first, I think, for a lot of people. When people come to the cloud industry, they ask me if they have to learn to code, because I think people are frightened to learn to code, quite frankly. They want me to say no. They want me to say, no, it's cool. You can get into the cloud industry, no code whatsoever. But I think that's the thing I would say to people is, you can get into this industry, anyone can do it. Now is the time. I just think I've just lost my video, actually. One sec. Let me try. Yep. Can you still hear me?
No, I can't see you.
1 second.
Okay.
Interesting. we might have to finish the interview without me on screen. I don't know if it doesn't want to change to me. 1 second, I'll swap for my different camera.
Okay.
Bear with me 1 second.
Okay.
It'll take me 2 seconds. Cool. Am I back?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really what I would say is, I think, this industry is open to anyone. And if you're thinking about it, don't hesitate. Don't worry about it. You can learn this stuff. With the coding stuff, just go today. Go online. If you search, like learn Python, and just try and write one line of code, let's say today. And I sort of, you just have to believe me that once you cross that first hurdle, that's the hardest part, right? Write that first line of code, and then it will start to become less scary, and just get into it, like get into the detail of it. Don't think about it too much. stop reading stuff about it, stop asking people questions, like just go, just have a go, just like actually get to get hands on, start playing with this stuff, like write some code yourself. That is what I would say.
So at last, I'll share your web links in the description of this video. People who find the video on YouTube can see and can learn, especially the cloud people will connect with what you are saying. I saw your YouTube videos and I can see you're explaining it very clearly. Some of the topics are very interesting, and also in your website it is very clear you are making even a newcomer who know nothing about cloud. If they see you or the way you are explaining, they can easily it is creating interest. I want to learn something new today, so it's really interesting. I hope your work helps a lot of people in the world, and it's a great initiative that you took. You can do your full-time job. You don't need to spend time in teaching people and writing and telling to other people and solving their problems. It shows the kind of interest that you have, and it's really inspiring, uh, and knowing about you and your work. And so at last, as an observer, as a person who is into tech industry from 10 plus years, what do you say about my work? Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's super interesting. I think what I've seen is a lot of people kind of really appreciating some of the questions and things like that you're asking. I think that for me is so essential. If you can ask good questions, and if you if you have the courage really to go out there and put yourself in front of people, because that's what you're doing, right? You're putting yourself on YouTube, you're publishing yourself, you're daring to go out there and put yourself in front of people. And a lot of people don't do that. So that's awesome. And like the questions as well is great, just, asking people questions, digging into those details, because people don't do this. People don't reach out on social media. They don't just ask questions. They don't initiate a conversation like this with a stranger. And the reality is, anyone could do this, right? Like anyone could set up these conversations, can publish them on YouTube. You point your phone. Anyone can do this. The barrier is so low that they can do this. But what's stopping them is just having that courage to do that. So I mean, it's just really super cool for you to give this platform to people like me to come and chat to you as well. But it's just great. I think it takes courage to do this, and some people sometimes maybe don't acknowledge that. You go watch YouTube and you think that these people appear on YouTube, but these are real people, right? Like it takes a bit of bravery to put yourself out there and to message people, hey, can we chat? Can we do an interview? So I really like that. That's really cool, man.
And what do you say about my questioning in this conversation?
Well, I mean, you've asked obviously some very interesting questions. We dug into some interesting topics here. I can't remember if there was a specific question that I think's better than the rest. I think the question you asked as well about like, when you're in the industry, like what do you learn from that? I think those types of questions they could be really powerful as well, because it's sometimes a question that I've not even, we're exploring some things in this conversation that maybe I haven't even thought about too much myself, because people don't ask these types of questions very often. So yeah, I think that one in particular is a very good one. But no, in general, just some good questions overall, I think so.
So thank you very much, Louis, for giving me your valuable time and spending the valuable knowledge of yours. And I'm sure this will affect a lot of people in the world, and also it helps even non-technical people to create interest and to come into the industry. Because of you, I'm sure this content is going to create effect in the world. So can I put this video on my can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Of course. Yeah. Please do upload it everywhere. Why not?
And also, can I put this video and audio clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and keep writing more stuff. We are going to follow your blog, and we are going to learn more from you.
Amazing, Sai. Very cool.
Yeah. Take care.
All right. I'll speak to you soon. Ciao.
Bye.